So today's conversation is going to be a little different because I have been wanting to talk about this with you, Dillon, and actually record it because we have this conversation, I feel like, every day. And we
Hmm.
have this conversation, I think, every day with clients, even if we're not talking about it to each other. And recently had a conversation with a family member about this, which really enraged me with an experience she had with a doctor. So for anybody who is struggling with weight loss, who like it's so confusing to figure out what you should be eating, that it's overwhelming, or if you're being told by your doctor that, hey, you can't do this on your own, you have to do this GLP-1, this video is for you. But I'm just going to jump into this conversation I had with a family member. She has been struggling with her weight for years, and yes, it bothers her. Yes, she's trying to do something about it. And she actually went to her doctor about strep throat. She wanted to get tested, and she calls me because she's upset because the nurse practitioner spent 15 minutes talking about her weight. And she said, oh, I noticed you did Wegovy a couple years ago, and why did you stop? And she was like, well, it made me nauseous. It made me not want to be interested in food at all. It made food completely unenjoyable. And then with the way you have to like dose your way up, by the time she got to the full dose, something happened with they didn't weren't able to give her. They ran out essentially because so many people were getting on these GLP-1s, and so she was gonna have to start all the way at the beginning when they finally got their stock back. And she's like, no, this isn't worth it. So she stopped. And the doctor was like, well, it could really, really help you. And there's this one now called Manjaro, and if and it's way less on the side effects. And she was like, yeah, my brother actually works for Eli Lilly, and he lost 100 pounds on his own. He didn't do Manjaro, and he could have. He had easy access to it. And the nurse practitioner kind of like looked down her nose at her and was like, that's nice if you can do that on your own. And so it just made her feel completely powerless, which, if you follow us at all, if you listen to anything we post, we're all about empowering you. And that's what really upset me the most about this conversation is, first of all, I told this family member, I was like, so I feel like if she didn't have a GLP-1 to be pushing on you, the topic of weight would have never came up, ever. And now that you decided you're not going to do that GLP-1, does she offer any advice on how to lose the weight? No.
I mean, that's a phenomenal point right there. The fact that she turned down the GLP-1 and then instantly the conversation ended. Not talking about your calories in, calories out, which we'll talk about that in a minute, or your hormones that are in charge of actually putting the energy or the fat into, or excuse me, the glycogen into the fat cell. That conversation died instantly the second that there wasn't a drug to be given for this. Sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to highlight that point.
No, that's a red flag. So if you are seeing a doctor who, when you start to say, hey, I want to take responsibility for my own health, I want to start eating healthy and exercising and things like that, and they look at you and they're like, yeah, that's cute. Probably not going to work as well. You should probably still take this drug. I would fire that physician immediately. Nothing wrong with that with the taking the medication. I am not saying that, but I'm saying that they should be leaving you empowered, not trying to take that power away from you. And that's what we're seeing in this diet field right now with these weight loss drugs is they've officially made it that so it seem like you're completely without control without these GLP-1s, that you have to be on them. And
Mhm.
so I want to talk today about the most common like myths around weight loss. The the narratives that like we're still fighting when we have these conversations with people, and so therefore people believe them, and it's keeping them stuck and keeping them sick. GLP-1s, they work because it makes you feel full, right? So you don't eat. Okay, so you're gonna lose weight that way, and that's one of the things that for most people who are trying to diet, they feel like they are gonna have to starve themselves. That being hungry is just part of it, and they don't want to be hungry. So really, when it comes to trying to lose weight, believe it or not, there is actually a way that you can lose weight without starving yourself. And you can actually feel full and satiated. Satiety is the key to being able to stick with the diet, right? So that's how GLP-1s work. They're going to slow down your digestive system so that you feel fuller longer. You're going to get really nauseous, but it's okay. Ignore that. It's totally fine because you're eating less. Therefore, less calories. Therefore, Dylan, calories in, calories out is a thing, right?
Of course, it's a thing that we've been lied to about since the dawning of the bomb calorie meter, which is where calories come from. So, before we start talking about calories in, calories out, I challenge the audience. Can you tell me what a calorie is? And if you say it's a measure of energy, that's partly true. You're not wrong. But how is that energy measured? That's the question I'm asking here. Have you ever looked into how a calorie is actually measured? It's essentially a machine that they take a food particle and they're going to burn it. And the amount of energy that it excretes and how much water it displaces is how many calories it gets deemed. So then my next question I'm going to pose to the audience here is how many of you have a, we'll call it an inferno inside of their GI tract? None of us. We don't have that bomb machine, that bomb burning calorie energy burning machine in our body. And so whenever they're telling us calories in, calories in, does it work whenever we start to reduce calories? Yes, but is there horrible side effects that come from reducing more and more of your calories? Absolutely. And this is another subject we're going to talk about whenever we get into the subject of GLP-1s a little bit deeper here, is talking about nutrient deficiencies, because that's what we see day in and day out. Whenever we're going through lab work, we've gone through thousands of labs now. And the vast majority of time, we're going to see a multitude of different things. We're going to see insulin resistance. And so whenever we're talking about bringing things back to calories in and calories out, not many of us have a combustion machine inside of our tummies, inside of our stomach. And so the whole calories in, calories in, out, the way that this works is you're actually playing on a certain hormone. And that hormone that you're playing on is going to be insulin. So one of insulin's jobs is it's going to take glucose as glycogen and it's going to shove it into the fat cell and it's going to tell your body to store energy. And so whenever we start to reduce calories, we are then in turn reducing the load of insulin that our body needs. And so whenever we reduce the insulin, we reduce the signaling for the body to then shove glycogen into the fat cell, increasing the fat, the adipose tissue on the body. But the problem here is you're going to keep plateauing time and time and time again. But essentially, your body will get to a certain set point. And once it learns to keep homeostasis there, you're going to plateau. And then what's the best way to then lose weight once you plateau after you've lost the first 20 pounds? Well, we have to do it even better. We've got to do the calorie restriction even more. So now we're at 900. Now we're at 800. Now we're at 750. And we have to keep going down in order to keep losing weight. Because what calories in, calories out essentially is doing here is putting a band-aid over a bullet wound. And so what you've done is you have reduced the calories, which has reduced the insulin within the body. And so therefore you have lost weight. But the argument on the other side of this is just because you've reduced the amount of insulin that you are creating via your beta cells, does that mean that you are now more insulin sensitive? To an extent, slightly. But the second that you add those calories back in, if you're not modulating exactly what is good for the body, that insulin resistance is going to come running right back instantly. So that's what I mean by calories in, calories out. It's a tool to be used, but it's not getting to the actual root of the issue. And it's helping with your fat loss to an extent until you plateau, and then you just have to keep doing it better and better.
So I'm going to kind of define a couple of things that you talked about there. So, for example, calories. First of all, how they came up with that term is that bomb calorimeter. Basically, they took food and they burned it and then measured the energy, the heat energy that came from that food. And then they were like, that's a calorie. Well, that's not how food actually works in our bodies. It interacts with so many different hormones, and that really determines how you gain weight. And you talked about insulin. Insulin is, a lot of people when they hear insulin, they're thinking diabetes, pre-diabetes, that sort of thing. And that's the only time we need to be concerned about that is with insulin resistance. But what really happens well beyond before your insulin levels start to affect your glucose levels is that insulin is the fat storage hormone. It is. You just talked about you have a exogenous insulin. You have to give yourself insulin. Your body doesn't produce it because you're a type 1 diabetic. And if you decided that you were just going to not give yourself insulin because you had a death wish or something and ate 10,000 calories a day, you would not gain weight. You would waste away because you don't have the insulin. So that's what brings me to the fact that when we work with people, we actually don't count calories. We don't count calories and we still get results. And that's because we're working on the premise of food and how it affects insulin and how it affects your glucose levels, because that determines how your body's going to use that food, whether it's going to store it as fat or whatever else. So I actually came with receipts on this because this is just a topic that is hotly debated, even in some very, I'm going to call it what Lane Norton is big on calories in, calories out. He's constantly posting memes about it, but he's ignoring some really good studies here. So this is from a book called Eat Smarter, and Sean Stevenson. Great book, by the way. But it talks about a study where they actually took participants and they kept the calories the same. They all the participants had to reduce their calories by 1,000. So the calorie deficit was the same across the board. The only thing they did was they messed with the macros. So how many carbs or fats they were eating. And so the study participants, this was a 8-week study period, the study participants in the lower carb breakfast group showed a 61% greater reduction in BMI, 65% greater weight loss, and a 34% greater reduction in waist circumference, and a 16% greater reduction in body fat percentage. Those are huge numbers, right? It wasn't the calories. It was the macros. It was the carbs, and carbs are what's going to influence that glucose spike, which is going to bring up insulin, right? So anytime we work with anybody, we're like, as long as you're prioritizing proteins and fats, that's all we're going to focus on. Ignore calories. Eat until you're full, as long as it's whole foods and it's proteins and fats, right? And that just blows most people's minds. And it's such a relief to not have to track calories. And here's the thing, tracking calories is so tedious, but also really inaccurate. You really can't track true calories, and even the really cool like fitness trackers are not really doing a good job of tracking your calorie expenditure. So it's basically a effort and futility here. So that's the thing, we want to look at glucose. And here's the problem: most of the time when doctors are working with their patients and they're doing blood work, right, they get so focused on things like LDL cholesterol that they'll ignore the fact that someone's triglycerides are double what it should be. And so this family member had the same experience. Prior to this most recent experience, when she saw her doctor, they did some blood work and they freaked out because her LDL was 1 point over. Freaked out, wanted to put her on a statin, sent her to a nutritionist who told her to stop eating meat, to limit her meat intake, to eat 5 servings of grains a day. And the examples of grains was like an English muffin, Eggo waffles, Pop-Tarts, cereal. And I asked this family member, I was like, so what are your triglycerides? Well, they were double what they should be. I said, did anyone say anything about that? Well, no. Here's the thing, triglycerides go up with carb intake. Triglycerides, you're going to be more likely to be insulin resistant, which is going to make you gain weight. Why are we not focusing on that? And I think it makes this conversation around weight loss seem more complicated than it is. Calories in, calories out sounds simple. Sometimes we oversimplify things and sometimes we overcomplicate things. And I think calories in, calories out is oversimplified, and it doesn't work for most people because, like you said, your body will eventually get to the point where our bodies are really cool. They have this thing, homeostasis. It likes to keep everything the same, no big changes. So when you drop the calories, at first you're going to lose weight. Some of that's going to be muscle. By the way, GLP-1s, even in their own clinical trials, 50% of the weight loss was muscle. That's a problem. So you'll lose weight, and then you're going to plateau. And then you got to keep bringing the calories down if that's the mode you want to use. Well, eventually you just paint yourself into what I call a metabolic corner, because eventually you're going to have to eat nothing to continue this. So that's why we do not subscribe to the calories in, calories out. And that's why you don't have to starve to lose weight.
Now, 3 points here that I want to highlight. Number one is how many of you that are thinking about calories in, calories out, or they're having a hard time coming up with the justification of what we're saying here. How many of you have done a calorically restricted diet and done blood work along with that have done extensive blood work, looking at over 60 different markers, not just the basic CBC panel with glucose, and that's not enough. You got to look at absolutely everything. And how many of you all are tracking what your organs are telling you as you're going through this caloric deficit? especially whenever we're looking at nutrient deficiencies, your albumins, your proteins, your sodiums, your magnesiums, your potassiums, things like that. And then so much disease comes from whenever we have a lack of nutrition. And so there's so much disease that happens whenever we don't have enough nutrients coming within the body, because your proteins are going to break down to amino acids, breaking down to peptides. For those of you that are on the peptide train right now, more you want fats to break down to fatty acids, and that's going to be one of the main building blocks of life. For females and males alike, for your sex hormones, for optimal sex hormones, your estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, all of those, you need to have good healthy fats, because those are steroid hormones. Steroid hormones have a base of fat. That's where they come from. And so you absolutely have to have that, and then LDL is going to be a major factor in that. And where does that come from? It comes from the liver. The liver is going to have to take in good nutrients in order to be able to make those. Point number two is for those of you that are doubting kind of what's going on with insulin. Whenever we say insulin, insulin resistance, like what Erica was saying, everybody wants to jump instantly into, well, I'm not a diabetic. The thing about insulin is insulin can rise in the background for up to a decade to a decade and a half. That's 10 to 15 years that your insulin can slowly be ticking up in the background, and your blood glucose is still going to be regulated. That A1C is going to stay down around 5.3, 5.2, 5.5, 5.6, till it finally starts to creep towards that 5.7. You start to touch that pre-diabetic range, but that's after years of insulin resistance. You don't go within a year from insulin sensitive to insulin resistant. This takes a long time to get to that point. And so what I also want to make with that point is, if you do have the spare tire, if you do have extra fat on your body, like I said, it is literally wrapped around one hormone and one hormone only. Because if you look at any type 1 diabetic when they first got diagnosed, and they're a great case study, type 1 diabetic, because they don't have insulin. If you look at them, it's called a wasting disease, because you literally waste away. The children that get diagnosed with type 1 diabetes are skinny as rails. They're not fat. They don't have a lot of adipose tissue. There's not a lot of that extra energy being stored in their body, because it's all wasting away. It's a wasting disease. And so calories in, calories out, once again, to kind of wrap that up, it does play into insulin, but not in the healthiest fashion, and it's not solving the underlying root cause of your insulin resistant state.
Well, if you ask anyone who's struggling to lose weight, what's the biggest hurdle when it comes to following a diet and getting healthier and losing weight? It's, I just feel like I'm always hungry. And so that's the draw with these GLP-1s, is it solves that problem for you. You're not going to be hungry. And what most people don't know is that GLP-1 is not some random chemical that they're only able to produce in a lab. Your body actually produces this on its own. And the more you eat fats and proteins, the higher that GLP-1 response is going to be, which is why meals with a lot of protein and fat is going to make you more satiated. A lot of times when we're working with someone and they're like, man, I just really feel like I need a lot of snacks, right? That is instant red flag that they're probably not eating enough fats and proteins during their meals. And it's instantly like, okay, let's look at your food journal here and see what you're eating. And usually it's like, let's increase that meat portion just a couple of ounces. Let's add a little fat here. And that solves it. They're able to stay satiated until their next meal. And so, yes, you can basically hack this essentially. I think most people do think that the GLP-1s are only made in this lab. It's totally foreign to our bodies, and it's not. We have this within ourselves. We just need to eat properly and focus on those fats and proteins. So that's the biggest lever we pull when we're working with people. And also when you're doing that, you get more nutrients. So another reason why most people are hungry an hour, 2 hours after a meal is, especially if they're not eating whole, real foods, right? They will feel hungry because there's not a lot of nutrients. That's where hangry comes from. So again, it's focusing on fats and proteins. This is what's going to be huge for being able to stick to a healthy diet and not feel hungry, not feel like you're suffering through it and white knuckling through it. So if you don't want to be feeling nauseous, if you don't want gastroparesis, if you don't want to lose your hair, if you don't want osteoporosis, if you don't want to go blind, if you don't want any of those side effects of the GLP-1s, you can do this on your own by eating protein and fat at every meal, a big portion of it.
Everything can be used in a tool style fashion, in the short term. And so we're coming down pretty hard on GLP-1s because we've seen the side effects. We know what it looks like. We know that the human body can naturally come to the place that you're trying to get it to. Is it going to be more difficult? Yes, because we're asking a lot of our bodies and of our environment. We live in America, for the vast majority of us. If you're watching this overseas, welcome. But here in America, what's going on is we have a life of convenience here, and it is a McDonald's on every corner. It's all about fast food. It's all about these little conveniences because for some reason we have decided that food and somebody working in the kitchen to supply the family with nutrients, or us working on our own kitchen supplying for ourselves, isn't worth our time. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. You have to invest in what comes into your body, and your body's going to give, that's the input. The output that you're going to get is going to be health. It's going to be a body that you're proud of. It's going to be healthy blood markers. It's going to be balanced hormones. It's going to be a head full of hair. It's going to be eyesight, all these different things. And so that's going to be the output that you get, because if you've never thought about anything with nutrition, think about this. Every cell, every single cell in your body was once made by or is made by the foods that you're consuming today. Your body is going to break down those into building blocks that then create your human body. So, would you rather be made of Pringles or ribeye steak? I know my answer.
And then when you get into the fat and protein discussion, usually the first thing that pops up is like, well, I've been told that I need fiber, and fiber is going to make me full, and that's what I need to do. Fiber is just carbs, guys. They are. So I'm going to let you just take off on fiber because it's your biggest shtick. So
Yes. Okay. So fiber, because everybody that we deal with, especially whenever we're dealing with people with insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, even on the type 1 diabetic side, whenever I first got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, I was told to eat a lot of fiber because there's a thing called resistant starch. And so what essentially they're playing on, and in theory, what they're hoping happens is that fiber being bound together in a certain formula, our body, our GI tract, our stomach acid, our enzymes, our bile, doesn't have the capability to break down fiber. What does is our gut bugs. But what they're playing on here, the reason they say resistant starch is good for blood sugar regulation or satiety, is because the fiber stays more whole in the systems. But what happens is your GI tract, especially whenever you don't have a good amount of good gut bugs, you don't have good balance there, and you've got dysbiosis, that fiber molecule essentially comes, so that fiber bound sugars is all fiber is. Those bound sugars are going to come through and grab the other sugar and push it on through the system before it can be absorbed into your body, thus creating a lower blood sugar level. And so in theory, that works. Now, maybe I'm weird, but I also haven't seen this really happen with a lot of our clients either. I noticed that if I increase my fiber content, my blood sugar stays exactly the same. If I have something that has, we'll say 24 net carbs, and then, or excuse me, not 24 net, we'll say 24 carbs, and then the other one has a net carb of 8, but the total carb count's 24. On both of those items, I have almost the same exact blood glucose spike, and I have to administer almost the same exact amount of insulin to cover for that. And so I won't listen to net carbs, nor do I tell people to really listen to net carbs too much, because we haven't seen the data to truly back up on the net carb side of things. But fiber itself, it being just that, where our bodies have a hard time breaking it down, once again, here in America, we have very poor gut health. With those being sprayed with like pesticides and herbicides, the chemicals, and then also those being genetically modified, it has wrecked our intestinal health. And so we no longer have a good gut microbiome to break down fiber anymore. And so that fiber is much like a Brillo pad bouncing around inside of the intestines, causing more problems than it is solving the problems. Does that mean that fiber is evil and that we should burn it at the stake? No, no, that's not at all what we're saying here. Fiber has its place, but what we've done is we've tried to make fiber a god of nutrition. That no matter what the problem is the person has, have you had enough fiber? I mean, how many times have you gone to the doctor and had some sort of issue in the GI tract and they're like, fiber is the answer? But then they don't talk about the basic building blocks of life being the amino acids, the fatty acids, your minerals, your coppers, your zincs. These things that your body absolutely needs, but they will talk all day about fiber.
yeah, and here's another thing about fiber is that, you talked about, oh, gut health. Well, that just means we need more fiber to feed those good gut bugs, right? And what we've seen is not the case at all. And if you look at the carnivore community, which is I love looking into people who have literally they don't have any fiber whatsoever. They don't touch vegetables. There are people who have cured their ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease with a carnivore diet. And they're actually doing studies now to like actual official clinical trials, because apparently you need to have clinical trials to prove anything in the, to be accepted in the medical field. And on the grains thing, you already mentioned, GMOs and pesticides and everything like that. Here's the truth about grains. Even if you get the most organic heirloom, like from Europe, that sort of thing, grains are seeds. They don't want to be digested. So a plant will put most of its chemical defenses into the seed, into its babies, to protect its babies, right? It does not want to be eaten, but what it does want to do is to be able to survive your digestive tract so that you poop it out into a nice pile of fertilizer out into nature and it can proliferate, right? But even if they're not genetically modified, these chemical defenses are affecting your gut. They are damaging your gut, and they have anti-nutrients, which means they bind to nutrients in your gut, so that you're basically nutrient negative when you eat these grains. They're not providing any nutritional value. They're just spiking your blood sugar. They're destroying your gut. Why eat them?
But Erica, the Bible talks about bread.
Yeah, the Bible does talk about bread.
Well, then this is a point that we tend to get a lot, and it's, yeah, I'm a Christian, Erica's a Christian, we're Christians. But the thing about it is yes, the Bible does talk about have your leavened bread. And the thing about it is, in older cultures, they didn't take grain off the stalk and mill it and turn it into flour instantly. It got sprouted and it got fermented, because these defense mechanisms that Eric is talking about here, people in the past, they would notice that there would be health complications that would come from pulling grains straight on the stalk, drying them, and then turning them straight to flour. They wanted to sprout them and then ferment them. Then they got turned into flour, and then you could consume it after all of those defense mechanisms got broken down. So there's a conversation to be had around that if you can find heirloom grains that are not genetically modified, and that if you're willing to go through that much tedious work, which took weeks for you to get to this point to have one loaf of bread. So if you're willing to go through that much work, then yes, maybe we could make an argument, as long as you're not insulin resistant, you don't have a high amount of insulin, that you can have a little bit of bread. But you've got to go through all those steps. And no, sourdough is not the cheat code here. Sourdough has plenty of gluten still left in it. Has it been fermented? Yes. But those grains weren't sprouted to begin with, and they weren't fermented as long as what people used to do in the past.
Yeah, so basically, I mean, we typically avoid grains. We're not saying that's absolutely necessary for you, but, keep in mind, this is going to spike your blood sugar. Just watch what happens. One of the best things you can get is a CGM. The little continuous glucose monitor in your arm. You can actually see how your blood glucose is responding in real time to the food that you're eating. We don't really think it's worth it because it's still spiking that blood sugar considerably. And if you're wanting to make big changes when it comes to your weight loss, you got to make big changes, right? So that's why, fiber is a lot of times what gets people stuck when it comes to their weight loss. It's what keeps people sick as well. If you're dealing with any chronic illness and any type of gut issues, fiber could definitely be perpetuating that. Now, pivoting here to the next question, but all that fat and all that meat is going to make your cholesterol go up, and that's a real problem. And I feel like this conversation has been happening even more recently. The only thing that matters is that LDL, that's going to cause heart disease. And here's the truth. Ever, if any study has LDL on its own caused heart disease, if you look at the actual study and you look at the actual participants, there are other factors like insulin resistance, inflammation, high triglycerides, all of those things, but they're going to point at LDL cholesterol. If anyone has any doubts about this, please follow Nick Norwitz. Man, he's the perfect example of this. Nick Norwitz, he's for 7 years now, he's been following a very keto diet. Before that, I believe I can't remember if he had Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, which one it was, but it was so bad. And so he switched to a keto diet and cured his gut issues. Gone, right? But his normal cholesterol jumped to 700. He's a Harvard scientist. He knows, this isn't good. He's probably heading straight towards a heart attack. But at the same time, this is what cured him, right? And this is how he feels good. So, so he made a bet. He just posted a video recently, if you guys go back and watch it. And he does a nice little short summary of this. And he, for 7 years, just kept up this keto diet, his cholesterol in the 700s, and he had a CTA scan, and he has 0 plaque in his coronary arteries. Soft, calcified, 0 plaque, right? They just did another study where it was a bunch of keto, carnivore people who have high cholesterol. It just runs in their family, that familial hypercholesteremia. And so they have LDL cholesterol in the 500s, 600s, but they are also those hyper
Responder.
muscle mass responders.
Hmm.
They're super lean, super fit, no insulin resistance, triglycerides are good. And they did CTA scans, at the beginning, and then a year later, they didn't have any plaque or calcium buildup whatsoever, especially compared to other people with lower LDLs. It was either less than other people with lower LDL or not significantly different at all. So LDL on its own is not connected. Now, why does cholesterol go up though when you eat protein and fats? That's what cholesterol does. It's these little boats that transport the fat, because fat is not water soluble. They do not mix. And so you have to have this cholesterol that kind of carries the fat molecules to where they need to go so that your body can use them. So if you eat more fat, that's more fat that your body has to deal with. Therefore, you need more cholesterol to carry that fat. A bad thing. It's just a normal adaptation that your body is doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, to reiterate exactly what you said there, there are zero studies out there that account for everything that goes into these buildups and these cardiovascular complications. They're just looking at that one singular marker, and then they've got a drug for that they're ready to give you. And what's fascinating, like Eric was talking about Nick Norwood's, he does an Oreo study. So definitely look up the Oreo study, because it actually turns out that for some individuals, sleep full of Oreos a day controls your cholesterol better than a statin drug ever could. And so that sounds mind-blowing, and it is. So check out that video. My LDL cholesterol runs between 250 and 350 on average, given the given year. It's between 250, and that's my LDL alone. And yet my calcium score last time I had it ran last year, goose egg. My ApoA and ApoB, both of those markers were in absolutely beautiful ranges. And so no sticky blood. And my VLDL is well below 15. I'm actually around 8 on my VLDL, which is the small, dense particles. And so if you really wanted to get into the nitty-gritty of your cholesterol and you really were worried about it, have your doctor run these markers on you, your calcium score, CTA, then get your ApoA, your ApoB, and your VLDL. And between those markers, that's going to give you a much, much deeper understanding of cardiovascular complication or cardiovascular risk than your LDL cholesterol will ever tell you. So those are some things to take to the bank there as far as those labs get ran. Calcium score, ApoA, ApoB, VLDL. Make sure you get those checked if you are worried about cholesterol. For us, if we're accounting for all of the variables that are going to cause cardiovascular complication, then LDL cholesterol is a non-issue for the most part. If your insulin's low, well, then that being the most inflammatory hormone, and that also being one of the hormones that whenever that goes high, you've got insulin resistance, so then your cells aren't getting a lot of energy to the mitochondria of the cell. And so we've got plenty of videos on insulin resistance, and you can type in insulin resistance and I'll explain that to you, because otherwise I'm gonna be rambling for 20 minutes on that. But your cells are not going to have a lot of energy, so you have to account for the insulin resistance. If there's low nutrient density within the body because you're not eating a lot because you're taking a GLP-1 or you're in a calorie deficit, then that's going to increase inflammation in the body. That's going to increase cortisol in the body. It's going to increase adrenaline in the body. And so all of that inflammation is going to start giving the wrong signals to the body, and your body's going to stay more in a catabolic state or a breakdown state. Then you're going to be in an anabolic or a rest and digest state, to where your body is handling all these oxidatively stressed pieces of health that need to get excreted out. It's also going to put more stress on your liver, and your liver is then going to get the wrong signal, and it's going to start producing the wrong product, such as those small, dense lipoproteins, that VLDL. So if you are worried about it, those are a few of the tests that you can check to really put yourself at ease.
And, fats and proteins, especially if you're truly focusing on animal based proteins, so the meat itself, meat's been around for thousands and thousands of years, right? But a lot of the carbs that we're consuming aren't even real food. It's like frankenfood. And so that's why this can have such a great effect when people do this simple switch. And it seems really simple. The idea is super simple. Here's another phrase that also seems simple: eat real food. It's not, because most people can't define what a real food is. Most, especially the younger generation, they have no idea, because 90% of the food that's in the grocery stores isn't real food. It's Franken food.
There was a story I heard this applies. So there was a story I heard the other day. There was this young woman who lived in an apartment building, and right outside of her apartment building, she had gotten a lemon tree. So she got this lemon tree, and she's got it on her back deck, on her back little porch area of her apartment. Her friend comes over and says, "Oh, you've got lemons." And she's like, "Yeah, it's my lemon tree." And then her friend plucks a lemon, goes inside, and puts it into her drink. Her friend that owns the apartment, that owns the lemon tree, comes in and says, "You can eat that? I thought you could only eat food or fruit from the store."
She thought had to go through another process.
Yeah,
And so when you say eat real food, they're like, okay, anything at the grocery store is food, right? No, it's not. If it comes in a box, it's probably not real food. It's been processed. And so when we say real food, we're talking about the food that's like on the outer perimeter, and even that's getting a little sketchy here
right.
of
Well,
the grocery store.
a
But
kind of a rule of thumb is if it looks very similar to the way it came out of the ground, the way it came off the tree, or the way it comes out of the animal, then it's a real food.
yep.
It's not, there's not a whole lot of processing that's happened here that's changed it from originally looking like I mean, like Cheerios, that says that it's, whole grains. It's anything but whole grains. It started as a whole grain, and through the chemical processing and the bleaching and everything that's happened over time, it does not end up as a whole grain anymore. It started off maybe as a real food item, but the end result is not a real food item. And they also have to go back, and if you ever see the word fortified on a food label, speaking of this, that means that they have stripped it down so bad that they have stripped all the nutrient density out of it. They had to re-fortify it with nutrients so it's acceptable for your body to eat.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's one that I love that advice. Eat real food. But a lot of people get confused on where to even start with that. And if you are eating real food, your body's going to recognize it. It's going to work on those satiety hormones correctly. That's the thing about the processed food is, yeah, they engineered it so that you can't stop eating it. Basically, the point at which the food has enough fat, has enough salt, has enough sweetness that you are eating it and you can't stop eating it. And, they don't want you to just be able to have one or two and be done. They want you to be addicted. So if you feel like you have no willpower when it comes to these foods, there's a reason for that. It's not that you are just, lack self-control, that you're morally, debunked or whatever. That's not it at all. They have engineered it to be so. So when you stick to real food, your body is going to know exactly when it needs to stop eating, especially if you are, the most of that plate is that meat and the fat. That's typically what I do, with my food. Oh, sorry, did you have something to add to that?
Well, I was just going to add in, speaking of whole real foods, I was going to speak about eating in season because that is a major factor in this. So if we look back at human history, we didn't have as much exposure to the same amount of sugar level that we have now, the same amount of carb count that we had now. Yes, we've eaten fruits in the past, but for the vast majority of us that aren't close to the equator, that was only during a certain season of the year that you got to have fruit. Otherwise, our ancestors didn't get to have fruit year round. Fructose, if I'm not mistaken from the latest data, digests 7 times faster than regular glucose in the system because it can bypass some of your digestive breakdown points that normal glucose has to go through. So fructose hits the bloodstream a lot faster and spikes blood sugar a little bit quicker than regular glucose does. It doesn't make it bad, doesn't make it evil, but what happens here is we eat copious amounts of fruits. But we're eating copious amounts of fruit, or we're eating, copious amounts of, honey and things like that. And granted, are these food items bad? No, that's not at all what I'm saying here. But whenever we're relying on that as something that's a staple in our diet, day in and day out, year round, 365. In the past, you would have a season where, it was your growing season. You would have your vegetables, you would have your fruits. Then eventually we got to the point of canning, but that didn't happen until, the turn of the century. There was some fermentation processes that they would utilize, but for the most part, the thing that you survived the vast majority of time on was the animal-based proteins. And so you had the vast majority of the year where you're eating a good copious amount of protein, and you're staying away and you're like fasted from the fructose and the sugar, because then again, I mean, what caveman ran headlong into a beehive to get honey in the past? We didn't have that much exposure to honey. And so, there's all these different things that people want to make an argument for that are healthy. And yes, they are to an extent whenever they aren't overdone. And if you're not fasting from these things for a couple months at a time, you're not following your natural biological rhythms of what our ancestors used to go through. And then, let's look back at just a quick example here of just kind of now times versus past times. Look at I challenge anybody, pull up a picture of New Year's, New York City, Times Square in 1950. They are healthy, they're skinny. There's not really a lot of obesity happening here. There's not a lot of disease going on here. And yet, the nutritionist field, there wasn't any. The personal training field, there wasn't any. There was not a gym on every corner. So, how did these people maintain health? It was quite literally through their diet because they were eating, to what Erica was saying, whole, real, natural foods that followed a season. And so they didn't need a nutritionist. They didn't need a personal trainer. They didn't need a health coach. They didn't need anyone to tell them how to eat because they did it all by themselves and their bodies responded in a positive manner. Once again, correct input, you got the correct output.
Yeah, and then the last thing I want to hit on is the mantra of everything in moderation. This is the thing that we have found with that everything in moderation idea is that what ends up happening is that those things that no longer stay in moderation because again these foods are highly addictive. There are people who can't, moderation is not an option. I'm sorry, but when you have an autoimmune disease and you're trying to reverse and mitigate that autoimmune disease, moderation is not an option. And I'm speaking from personal experience here. I had to completely come off of grains and legumes and dairy and everything like that for me to go into full remission from my autoimmune disease. And if I go back to that, I'm going to end up sick again. And I think we need to think about that. It depends. It's a very personalized, dependent on you, what you've got going on in your body. But if you're dealing with a chronic illness, moderation may not be a good idea for you. If you're dealing with food addiction, moderation is not a good idea for you. Talk to any food addict. It is just as bad as alcoholism. It really is. But you know what? With an alcoholic who's trying to be sober, we don't go up to them and we're like, hey, you gotta have just one sip of this cocktail. We would never do that. But for someone who's struggling with food addiction, they're constantly bombarded, and you're insulting grandma if you don't have her pumpkin pie or whatever it is, and her cookies, and they're guilted into it, and they're struggling with a real addiction where moderation is not an option. And it does drive me nuts that most of the people who talk, actually there's a couple types of people that talk about moderation, but one of the subsets of people that talk about moderation all the time are these like 21-year-olds, super fit, have never probably gained weight in their life, and they're like, everything in moderation.
The videos of the personal trainers throwing up pizza and being like, you can have this too, and look just like
they got
me.
like the six-pack abs.
Yeah.
They've never dealt with a leaky gut. They've never dealt with insulin resistance yet. They're so young, but they're talking to a population that has been really bombarded with all of those issues. And so that population is like, okay, cool. So I can still have my pizza and Big Mac and French fries and things at least on the weekend. And then they're still stuck and struggling and wondering why they're not losing weight, why they're not feeling better, why they still have brain fog, all of this stuff. And it's because moderation for certain people doesn't work. And that's okay. You are not crazy. You are not being restrictive. If you're avoiding foods that are toxic for you, you're avoiding essentially poison, and that's not crazy. Continuing to eat the things that are keeping you sick, that is crazy.
No, and it is a very frustrating thing because of exactly what you really did a great job of explaining that. But it is a very frustrating thing because you're giving the drug addict an excuse to touch the drug. You're telling them, hey, listen, I know that this is your downfall, and I know it's bad, and it's done a lot of bad for you over the years. You've developed diabetes, you've developed ulcerative colitis, Crohn's, Hashimoto's, you name it. This thing has been contributing to it, if not fully, at least partially. So this drug you got going on here, we're going to allow you, I'm going to tempt you a little bit. You're going to have a little bit of this. So take a little bit of that methamphetamine. Have a little bit of that cocaine. It's going to be okay. Have just a touch. Yeah, and some people, it's not good. You shouldn't lean into that. And you. And if you're being honest with yourself, you can make that determination. And I know this entire podcast here, this entire video, we've been really hammering hard on this because this is a subject matter that does frustrate the mess out of us because we care. because we know what the truth looks like. We've seen the lab work, we've seen the changes, we've worked with so many people, and so we see what works and we see what doesn't work. And so it frustrates us to no end whenever people keep getting lied to about what their health can look like and the complications that come from fast and easy weight loss. If you're not making lifestyle changes, then you're not going to get a healthy, once again, inputs, outputs. If you're not giving a healthy input, and a GLP-1 is not a healthy input, if you're not giving a healthy input, you're not going to get a healthy output. And so you want to make sure that you do focus on a few different things here. So Erica, I guess we'll wrap it up by going, kind of rapid fire on this. What are your top suggestions for people to start implementing today to help them start to control their weight?
Eat meat until you're full. Literally, eat meat until you're full. Start your day with meat. Start your day with a protein, and don't worry about the calories in, calories out. Just eat meat.
Mhm. Make sure that you're hitting for the average female, between the ages 20, 65 years old, and you're mildly active, you need to get at least 120 to 100, upwards of 150 grams of protein per day. Sounds like a lot of protein. It's really not that hard to hit. A good example of this would be if you start your day off with 2 eggs and 2 pieces of bacon, that's going to roughly be 6, 12, almost roughly about 18 to 20 grams of protein right there at the beginning of the day. Then at lunch, you have 6 ounces of chicken. That's going to be roughly 35 to 40 grams of protein. Then for dinner, you're going to have an 8 ounce steak. That's going to be roughly about 50 to 55 grams of protein. You're pretty much there. You add in one protein shake or one beef stick or a little bit of both, and now you're hitting a buck 20. And so very easy to hit. It's just having 3 square meals a day and like 1 or 2 little snacks in there that are healthy. So that's for the female. For the male, it's going to be a little bit more. And so normally I say 150 to 200 is kind of where my guideline is. And so I'm normally hitting about 200 to 220 grams of protein per day, me personally, to maintain the life that I want, make sure that I'm keeping my hormones and everything in balance. Fat should be shortly behind that. And so your fats, normally if you're hitting your proteins, you're hitting your fats. And so it's hard to hit fats without hitting your proteins, but it's easier to hit your fats whenever you're having adequate amounts of protein. So that would be kind of suggestions as far as that age range goes. Then, of course, the older individuals, the people that are more towards the elderly ranges, the 70s and 80s, you still want to be getting close to about triple digits. You want to be in the 90s to the 100s on protein, and that's going to help give your body the building blocks that it needs in order to keep functioning.
I want to speak directly like to the women out there. I know the idea of eating a lot of meat is, overwhelming. It's, we're supposed to be these delicate little things and eat our little salads and, that sort of thing. You will feel so much better. You will feel amazing once you start eating meat. And it's, 4 ounces is it's not a serving, 6 to 8 is what you want to shoot for at least. Honestly, you don't even have to measure. That's the beauty of eating real food and eating meat. Go for the fattier cuts of meat. Nothing wrong with that. Fat is energy. It's not going to make you fat because guess what? It's not spiking that blood sugar. And it tastes amazing. Just eat until you're full because that food is real whole food that has plenty of protein and fat. It's not going to trick your satiety hormones. It's not going to trick your brain. Your body will know that you're full and you won't overeat and you'll feel satiated until the next meal. And it's as easy as that. I know this makes it seem oversimplified because it's simple, but it's not easy. We understand that with the environment that we're living in and all the processed foods that are available to us, and they're good, they're delicious. I totally understand it. But women, please eat your steak. You will feel amazing. You'll actually lose fat and you won't look like a man because you don't have the hormones for that.
Oh, this is a fun subject. So ask any dude, any guy that has been like a lot of times women do get worried. They're like, I'm gonna start looking, I'm gonna get too much muscle, I'm gonna look like a man. Ask any guy that's gone to the gym for more than a year. It is hard to put on muscle. And for you to be able to put on muscle as a female, then to rival a man, whenever you're looking at like the CrossFit athletes or the bodybuilding, the women bodybuilders that do have a lot of muscle mass, that is someone who has worked for years and years and years and years to get to that point, and they're strategically making that happen. You just naturally putting on muscle and then going to the gym and working out, 3 times a week, that's not gonna be the case for you. And so that's not a slide. That's just that's very easily kind of debunked as far as worried about putting on muscle, and I hear that, as a personal trainer, that's what I hear a lot from people is, "I don't wanna look like a man." It's gonna take us 5 to 6 years for you to get to that point, so we got plenty of time to get to that worried.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because honestly, anytime I put on muscle, I feel like I look more feminine I actually like I'm not like, oh my gosh, my shoulders are getting big. I actually look like I have more of a curve through the waist and
The
everything because my
hourglass.
exactly
Hmm.
the hourglass shape that if I'm not working out and things like that, I'm kind of rectangular. Girls, if you want a butt, that butt is muscle, so you need to build up the muscle. That's what's great about butts. You can actually build those up. So if you want some curves, working out and eating your protein, eating that steak is going to help that. You're going to get curvier, not big, bulky, muscular football looking.
But we say all this because we care. And so it sounds like we've really gone very hard at the weight loss sphere, and we have because of the fallacies that are told to us in the weight loss sphere. And so the biggest thing is, the biggest takeaway is, eat your meat, eat your protein. Protein's good for the body. Eat your fats, and don't be afraid to start. Make sure that you've got yourself lined up, and you know where your tripping points are. You know you, and if you don't, it's time to discover you. But you know where your tripping points are. So if there is something in the house that you know you're going to have that's going to throw you off, throw it in the trash can, get it out of the house, don't buy it again. Make it difficult. If you really want that item, we'll say Oreos since we talked about that earlier. If you want those Oreos, you leave them at the store and you have to work hard to get to those Oreos. You got to get yourself up, get out of your pajamas, get in the car, get to the grocery store, get back home, open them up, eat the Oreos. That's more of a deterrent than just having them in the cupboard. So do the things that you need to do in order to set yourself up for success. And if you ever need any help with anything, that's what we're here for. Holler at us, comment on the video, send us a message. Our email is going to be chronicallyhealthy.me@gmail.com. We are here to answer any questions. So please reach out to us, let us know. We just want to see you succeed in whatever capacity that looks like for you.
Yeah. And if this has been at all helpful for you, or if you know somebody who could benefit from this conversation, please like, share this, and subscribe to the channel so more people can see it. Thanks, guys.